fantasy football.
There has never been a more obvious sell.
There's a huge edge to be gained by looking into things like this.
With the hype, it's only going one way. He's still too cheap.
How can you not love fantasy football?
It is week 3. Can you believe we are 2 weeks through the fantasy season already? We are the Fantasy Sanctuary. We are here to help you get set up to win some weeks and win some money in DFS. Tom, we'll dive straight into it. We've got the biggest, most important matchup of the week. It is the only game on the main slate that has got an over 49. It's at 54.5. The Chargers against the Vikings. It feels like this is very much 2-0-2 teams, that it's loser leaves town. Is there anyone that you're particularly liking the look of in this matchup?
It's really a pick your poison type matchup. I mean, you look at this and you could either attack it through the passing or you could attack it through the ground game. I mean, like the Chargers, we've got it on screen there. They allow the most passing yards at 666 passing yards through 2 games. And the Vikings have allowed the 4th most rushing yards across 2 games, which includes, of course, DeAndre Swift going for 175 last week. So there are kind of outliers within that. But for me, this is the 3rd week in a row. I'm just going to keep coming back to Keenan Allen. Over his last 10 games, he's had target totals of 8, 7, 14, 14, 9, 14, 6, 11, 9, and 10. And over that period, he's averaged 19.6 PPR points in that spell. That's incredible amount of return. And we absolutely should not be afraid to just keep playing him as his price goes up on DraftKings. You can see there he's up to 7.6K now. He was just around the 7K mark when DraftKings first opened to start the year. But that's completely fine. So I'm playing Keenan Allen. Obviously, Justin Jefferson, you can count on 100 receiving yards every week. He's had over that in both games so far this year. Hasn't had the touchdowns yet. That always feels like the part of the game where if Justin Jefferson suddenly starts getting the touchdowns, things could really explode. Josh Kelly, his matchup this week is going to be far better than it was against the Titans last week. And if that means that he comes at a reduced ownership this week, then he's an even better play than he would have been anyway. In terms of the peripheral players, I mean, Gerald Everett, he's playing less snaps than he did last year. Donald Parham has seen his snaps go up from 20% last year up to 50%, which is really eating into what I hope would be quite a valuable role for Gerald Everett. Jordan Addison, his snaps jumped by 15% over week 1 to week 2. And he seems like he's really just growing into that wide receiver role, slowly taking it away from KJ Osborne. I think if you're looking to get different in this game, if you're playing on DraftKings, you can look at stacking and adding those peripheral pieces to people like Jordan Addison. Or you could be looking at, I like the idea of stacking Justin Herbert with Josh Kelly and then adding Keenan Allen as well. I think attacking it that way is going to help you to get different and help you to get leverage on the field. So yeah, I mean, for me, this game, you just play everyone involved in it all the way down to if you have to start KJ Osborne, then you have to start KJ Osborne on a wing and a prayer.
Yeah, I love this matchup. I love what both these teams are doing for fantasy, quite frankly. You can see on the screen here, we hoped all offseason and prayed that Kellen Moore coming across would mean that Justin Herbert would finally start pushing the ball downfield. And he's averaging 10.6 air yards per attempt. It's the most impressive thing that he's keeping his accuracy. He's keeping that, high completion percentage. Yet he's pushing the ball downfield, and it's fantastic. And it's been amazing for Keenan Allen. You said yourself he is top 5 wide receiver through 2 weeks. He's been absolutely fantastic. I think if you're in a dynasty league and you're a contender, he's a really good buy because I think you can probably buy him for less than a first. For anyone that's not, already contending, if the team that's got him isn't a bona fide contender, you should be knocking down that door because, yeah, he's getting up there in age. Yeah, he's, approaching that wide receiver age cliff. But I have no concerns that he's not going to keep continuing to produce all season. And anytime you can get a wide receiver 1 for wide receiver 3-4 prices, I think that's an absolute smash. We're going to move on to the next matchup. So we've got Atlanta and Detroit. Feel like 2 of the most unique offenses, I think, in terms of the NFL at the moment. The Falcons running the ball at an obscenely, league high rate. Detroit doing some really unique things. Is this a matchup that you're attacking this week?
Yeah, and I think again, this is one of the kind of there's not too many over-unders over 46% this week. I think you look at what the Falcons did between week 1 and week 2. Bijan Robinson, his rushing attempts jumped from 10 to 19. He had 6.5 yards per carry last week. So with 2 games into Bijan Robinson's career, and he scored no less than 20 DraftKings points in each matchup. So I'll definitely be playing him. I completely think he's fine to be playing in cash. I know some people worry about Tyler Algier. I'm not there. I'm all aboard the Bijan Robinson experience. In terms of other players, I mean, we saw Drake London be slightly more useful last week, and people seem to still believe that the Kyle Pitts breakout is coming. But we saw Jonnu Smith getting plays designed for him. Jonnu Smith getting the same sort of amount of targets as Kyle Pitts last week. And I'm just at a point where I don't know whether Arthur Smith even likes Kyle Pitts, whether that's the type of tight end who he really wants, or would he prefer somebody who is going to do a bit more blocking in the running game and all that kind of stuff, which matters to Arthur Smith. On the Detroit side of things, I made the mistake today of tweeting, which is never a good idea. And a lot of people got mad with me because I pointed out that Jahmyr Gibbs hasn't played a lot of snaps yet. He hasn't played a lot of snaps yet. And yes, he does stand a better chance to play more this week. But Craig Reynolds has filled in over the last few years a number of times for the Lions when players have gone down, and he's done quite well. I'm not saying he's a good running back. I'm not saying anything like that. But behind this offensive line, the key thing that matters is, can you pass protect well so that when they lean into play action, something they do frequently because Jared Goff's so good at it, then you need to be able to pick up blockers. So I just think that there's a chance Craig Reynolds plays slightly more than people would like. And at 6,600, I think Jahmyr Gibbs is probably one of the trap plays of the week on DraftKings. Josh Reynolds at 4,200. I mean, he's been consistent at this point. You can almost plug and play him in your deep leagues if you need a wide receiver flex play, because he is just getting there every week. So I'm completely fine with that. I think at a push, you could possibly play Sam Laporta. But yeah, I think this is definitely one where last week in the DFS clinic, which is members only video, which we do for our YouTube members, I talked about if you're stacking Jared Goff, you probably want to double stack him, because if you're counting on Jared Goff to get there in points, he's probably spread the ball around and there's probably the whole offense has gone off. So if you're looking at it from a DraftKings point of view and wondering who to stack, I'd be taking Jared Goff and then Amon-Ra St. Brown and at least Josh Reynolds or Sam Laporta.
Yeah, I love Reynolds as a sneaky play this week. I think you're talking about Craig Reynolds. Our friend of the show, Wyatt, pointed out on Twitter this week that people are going to be mad when Craig Reynolds gets more carries than Jahmyr Gibbs. I think you can guarantee it. I think it's almost 100% happening. At some point, we've got to believe what the Lions are telling us and what they're doing on the field. And I think they love Jahmyr Gibbs, but I think that they see him as a not an every down back, and they're going to sprinkle him in terms of his usage. YouTube member Paul Pickin in the chat, Carl Britt's breakout week. I hope so. Maybe I'm too far into the weeds with this. I think the talent is there. The usage isn't what we'd want, but it's getting there. He's opening the red zone consistently, and I just think that there is going to be an opportunity that it will come. But we've got a few. Go on. I'll let you.
I'm just going to say,
retort.
I mean, Kyle Pitts is 3,900. He's become that punt play tight end now on DraftKings. So if you're looking at it from a daily fantasy perspective, he's not going to get a lot cheaper. And people will want to chase that ceiling. But for me, it's a tournament play only. You can't play him in cash games whatsoever because there is no floor with Kyle Pitts. We've been doing this for so long and nothing has materialized. So, yeah, I think if you want to take shots in tournaments, if you want to go, okay, I'm going to double stack Jared Goff with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Josh Reynolds, and then I'll bring it back with Kyle Pitts. I absolutely get that because you can probably get to Justin Jefferson and Bijan Robinson and other studs by doing a cheap stack like that.
Yeah, and we've got a couple of questions in the chat. So we've got Drew saying thoughts on the Derrick Henry DMP and validity of starting Spears this week in PPR, given the desolate state of running backs. What do you think?
Well, I mean, you know your roster better than me, Drew. It's difficult. It's pretty grim out there. I've definitely got some tricky start sit decisions that I'm kind of going through at the minute. In terms of Derrick Henry, we've seen he's not getting the workload that we kind of expected he might to start the year. And Tajay Spears is averaging 6.9 yards per carry to Henry's 3.6. So when Spears is getting in, he's being really productive with it. So I don't mind it as a punt play if you've got no better options, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see Derrick Henry out there still getting sort of 50% of the snaps or whatever.
Yeah, I love Spears, but it feels maybe a little bit too early. I'm sure we'll come on to it when we get to the Titans, but I'm not quite sure I'm fully there on starting Spears yet. And then we got another one of our YouTube members in the chat saying, how much is too much exposure to the Chargers-Vikings game?
Well, the one thing to be wary of is the fact that you're not getting this past anybody. Everybody knows this over-under is far bigger than any of the others. So you could, if you wanted to fade this game, it would be a very contrarian move. But if the game becomes a bit of a damp squib, then it's huge leverage on other games. If it's something like, if the Ravens Colts or if, say, the Falcons Lions game turns into one of the shootouts and you've kind of heavily targeted them instead, then you have huge leverage on the field. But in terms of how much exposure is too much to the Chargers Vikings game, I mean, I'll definitely have 2 or 3 lineups that revolve around it.
Perfect. And if you are in the chat watching live, give us a like, give us a subscribe. We're 3 subscribers away from hitting 1350, which is a nice round number. So if you're not already subscribed, hit that button down below and do us a solid. Next matchup, Tom, your Baltimore Ravens are playing the Colts. I guess the big question here is Anthony Richardson going to play? What Colts team are we going to be getting?
It doesn't sound like he's going to. I mean, he's still going through the concussion protocol. And I think for a rookie as raw as Anthony Richardson, I don't think you necessarily want to put him in on a week with no practice going up against a defense like this Ravens one, which is led by Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator, who put Joe Burrow in a complete tailspin last week. So I think games like that, you would have wanted Anthony Richardson having a full week of practice so that, he's playing in training against those looks and they're really drilling down on it. So I'd be very surprised at this point if Anthony Richardson starts. I think the Colts have enough faith in Gardner Minshew. Like, he came in last week and he was serviceable. He did all right. I think there's no reason for them to be overly worried about what it looks like with Gardner Minshew. But I don't particularly think that the Colts are going to have a huge amount of success this week. I think when you look at the Colts defense for allowing the 5th highest rate per pass attempt at 7.9 yards. I think what the Ravens are doing right now is an incredibly well-balanced attack, 47% run ratio to 53% pass. And the Ravens wide receiver target share is up by 26% compared to this, last year's average. They are spreading the ball around. We saw in week 1, it was Zay Flowers. Last week, it was kind of Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers, and Nelson Aguilar when Odell Beckham got injured. I would be surprised if Odell Beckham plays. I feel like the Ravens probably sit him. So maybe this is finally the week where we see Rashad Bateman get a little bit more involved and we see him ramping back up to what we kind of hoped he would be. But one thing's for sure, it's like Mark Andrews is always going to be Lamar's favorite target. During the offseason, there were people talking up, Mark Andrews won't see the volume that he used to because they've got better wide receivers now. Well, he walked back in last week to a 24% target share against the Bengals, and 50% of those came on 3rd or 4th downs when you need to make a play. So I think the Ravens side of things is quite straightforward. I'm not touching the running backs. I don't think that that's a position I want to get involved in. On the Ravens side, Justice Hill has a toe injury. Gus Edwards is Gus Edwards, and maybe he gets you 2 touchdowns, but you need 2 touchdowns and probably 80 yards to pay off this price on this slate.
Do you think
Zach Moss,
if Justice Hill doesn't go, which it seems like he's potentially going to miss this week, does that make you more interested in Gus Edwards?
No, not particularly. I think Melvin Gordon or Kenyon Drake would see some level of involvement, but it's just, well, in redraft or dynasty, I'd absolutely be fine starting Gus Edwards if Justice Hill doesn't play. I think that's clear. You can definitely start him in those scenarios. But in terms of DFS for leverage upon the field, we have to look at what just Gus Edwards brings to the table, even at 5,300. And you say, okay, well, I probably need 18 to 20 points to really make this play worthwhile. And I'm just not sure Gus Edwards has that in him unless he gets a 100-yard bonus and at least one touchdown. In terms of the Colts side, Zach Moss was probably a bit like, I didn't expect anything from Zach Moss last week. And shout out to our friend James Lacey, who was all over him in DFS. And Zach Moss goes out, takes a huge amount of touches and does okay with them. So Zach Moss, if you really wanted a contrarian play, you could probably play him. But Joe Mixon didn't do much against this Ravens defensive front. So I'm not sure Zach Moss will. I don't know. Do you see it any differently?
I really like Zach Moss. I think he's a top 15 back for me. But I think this is the difference between, setting a managed league lineup in a dynasty league or a redraft league to DFS. I really like him as a solid RB2, but I don't think I'll have any exposure in terms of DFS. The one player I'm really intrigued on, we've talked on Anthony Richardson. I think I'd be shocked if he starts this week. This is the reason why you bring in Gardner Minshew, is so that if there is any questionable weeks, you can just rest Anthony Richardson, roll with Minshew, and know that you're going to keep most stuff ticking along. But from a dynasty perspective, I've seen enough for Anthony Richardson. I'm all in. I think he's a top 8 dynasty quarterback. I'm happy paying. He's getting up to 3 first territory for me. I think that for me, we knew the rushing production was going to be there. We knew he was going to have accuracy issues. But the thing that I've been so impressed with is his pocket awareness, the fact that he just doesn't take sacks. He's making all the right reads. It's not just that, we talk about these athletic quarterbacks and the hit on them always seems to be, well, they can't process. He is going 1, 2, 3 better than any rookie I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years. He's phenomenal. The only question is accuracy. And I think that doesn't need to be there. I think he's a good enough passer that he can get by on what he is at the moment. So yeah, I'm all in. If you can go and buy Anthony Richardson in a dynasty league because people don't realize that he's going to be a superstar, I think Anthony Richardson is what everybody wants Justin Fields to be, basically.
Yeah, and I think you can absolutely stack Michael Pittman as a bring back to Ravens stacks this week. I think if you're looking at Lamar and Andrews or Lamar Andrews Flowers or any kind of thing like that, Michael Pittman's shown that it doesn't matter whether it's Gardner Minshew or Anthony Richardson at quarterback. He's been very fantasy viable over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've the next matchup we've got is Buffalo at Washington. The Bills haven't quite been firing on all cylinders. Josh Allen has got the lowest percentage of passes attempted 20 yards or more downfield in the league, which is wild when you think of Josh Allen pushing the ball downfield. Are you expecting a kind of a bounce back? And is this a matchup that you think could turn into a bit of a shootout?
I think part of that is because week 1 against the Jets have had his number for the last few matchups and he's really struggled against them. And then week 2 against the Raiders, I'm just not sure he really needed to put his foot down and stuff. So I think there's definitely a case of Josh Allen is slowly turning it on and we might see it as and when. I'd be fine playing him in DFS, obviously in redraft or any kind of format like that. You're going to do that. The Commanders' big weakness really is in the passing game against the slot receiver. Over the last 2 games, they've given up the 4th most fantasy points to the position. And it'll be interesting to see how the Bills decide to try and attack that weakness, because in week 1, Stephon Diggs played 47% of his snaps in the slot. Last week, it dropped out like 20% against the Raiders. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Diggs cycling more in the slot than normal. Dalton Kincaid or Dawson Knox, they've both played plenty of snaps from there. So you can probably tell yourself enough of a story to play Dalton Kincaid. I mean, he's had back-to-back games with 4+ receptions. He had 5 receptions last week against the Raiders, and they seem to be using him further downfield than they were against the Jets when his ADOT was incredibly low. So they're getting him involved in ways that are more interesting. So you can start pretty much all of your Bills. I mean, James Cook looks great. Yes, he's not getting the goal line work, but sooner or later he's going to break one of those big runs, and Josh Allen is using him in the passing game, so we can survive that. In terms of the Commanders, Brian Robinson, is probably the surprise of the season at the position. He's seen the ninth largest opportunity share amongst all running backs at 75%. He's at 42.5 PPR points. The Bills might not be like the most ideal matchup for the Commanders in terms of a rushing defense, but they've allowed 5 yards per carry to running backs so far, so it's not like you can't run them. I'm a little bit concerned about Jahan Dotson, though. His air yards per target last year it was 13.9. This year, it's 7.6. I don't know if this is an Eric Bieniemy thing and he's just trying to use him closer to the line of scrimmage to make sure that he gets those catches. But he's certainly not getting those big explosive plays that we were loving last year. Tight end, if Logan Thomas misses out with concussion, I've no interest in either John Bates or Cole Turner because they completely split the role last week.
Yeah, I think touching on the Jahan Dotson piece there, I'm the biggest Jahan Dotson fan. I came into the season expecting this Washington offense to basically be two pieces. I expected it to be Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson and nothing else. I didn't expect any of the peripheral receivers, tight ends to be a factor in the passing game. But you can see on the screen there, no Washington wide receiver was over a 17.6% target share. Like this offense, and Sam Howell, credit to him, has done a phenomenal job spreading the ball around the field. So really excited on what he is. The one thing I think, James Cook, I think he's sneaky good at the moment. I don't think people are realizing how good he's been because he's not been scoring touchdowns. And yes, he's not going to get a huge amount of touchdowns because he seems to be taken off the field inside the 10. But we're going to start to see him punch a few in from distance. And the fact that he's getting all that receiving work, you can see on the screen here, he's putting up the yards after contact. I'm really excited about what he could be as the Bills are in slightly more, traditional, competent games. Because I think you can throw that Jets matchup after the Rodgers injury. It was wild. And I think last week, as you said, they basically didn't need to produce. But I love the point about Brian Robinson as well. For Dynasty, I think he's that volume-based RB2. You've got to hold your nose, but I think he's a nice little buy because I think people don't quite realize how good some of these guys are producing yet. I think next week, if he has another good week, his price is probably going to double. The next matchup we've got is New Orleans at Green Bay. Interesting teams. I think there's plenty of injuries floating around. I think it's going to be a question of who's fit as to who we can start in these matchups. But is there anyone you think that is a plug and play this week?
Well, I know plenty of people who were loading up on Kendre Miller over the summer in best ball, really hoping that this is Kendre Miller's week. We hoped that we might get up to 3 weeks of that before Alvin Kamara came back in week 4. And so far, Kendre Miller hasn't been able to get on the field. But reports are that he's healthy. Looks like he could make his debut this week, which, if you saw Tony Jones sort of crawling in with 2 touchdowns in week 2, it left you kind of thinking, well, Kendre Miller probably could have done that and done a little bit more. So that split will be interesting. I mean, Tony Jones is somebody who's been around the Saints for a little while. There's definitely people who thought he could be an interesting prospect at one point. So if Kendre Miller is $200 cheaper than Tony Jones, 4,300 on DraftKings for a running back is insanely cheap. That will be a popular pick if we get any kind of indication that this is going to be Kendre Miller's backfield. But this offense, it's just running through the wide receivers at the minute. As you can see on screen, the Saints wide receivers are targeted at the highest rate in the league at 74%. And Derek Carr, what he's been doing, he forces the ball downfield. We see this. So Chris Olave, he's got a 40% team air yard share, which is great. Michael Thomas had 17 targets in 2 games, but he's yet to finish as a top 36 wide receiver. And I think he's going to be the kind of player who's going to need touchdowns to be able to do that. Rashid Shaheed is the only Saints wide receiver or tight end to score a touchdown so far through 2 games. So we probably haven't seen the kind of offensive explosion that we'd quite like to see. Juwan Johnson, he's playing at least 75% of snaps in both games. So I think sooner or later, Juwan Johnson is going to get back into form, and hopefully we'll see him and Derek Carr develop a better on-field chemistry. So on the Saints side, I'd be playing Kendre Miller. I'd be playing Michael Thomas at a push, and obviously you're playing Olave. I think Rashid Shaheed is very much dependent on what your roster is like and whether you need to. On the Packers side of the ball, AJ Dillon just isn't a good running back. We've seen enough now. For years, it was always, AJ Dillon just needs opportunity. Aaron Jones to be out of the way. And all we've ever seen from AJ Dillon is the occasional touchdown games and slightly better performances in cold weather games in Green Bay in like December. And the rest of the time, it's just not an awful lot. Like last week, he had 1 target and 1 catch when he had all the opportunity shared to himself. Over the last 2 games, he's had 31 touches for 99 yards. Like last week, he had 16 touches and finished with 7 points. Like that is abysmal. So I've been done with AJ Dillon for a while, but I would just implore everybody to also be done with AJ Dillon. Your boy Jaden Reed, 32% target share last week, 19 points. Are you going straight back to the well? Do you think that's sustainable for him?
I think it's concerning. He had a 44% targets per route run rate. I think you can see that the Packers want to get the ball in his hands. I'd be concerned that you're sort of kind of chasing after points, because I think we saw the 2 touchdowns last week, and I feel like he's not going to do that every week. And I think that he's probably one that I wouldn't be playing for DFS. In deeper Dynasty leagues, in redraft, yeah, I'm fine starting him. But I just think at that price, he's gone up a little bit over the last couple of weeks. And I think that he's probably touchdown reliant in order to pay back on that price, because I don't think he's going to see the kind of 8-9 targets that he would need to kind of pay that off. The guy I want to talk about, though, Tom, Jordan Love, it feels like you're either a lover or a hater and nobody is in between. He's got a horrendous completion percentage over expectation. You can see on the screen here, Sam Hoppins talking about it. But this offense is one of the best schemed up offenses in the league. He is doing exactly what it needs to do. He is a game manager at quarterback. And I feel like we're treating Jordan Love like he's a 4th-year starter. This is a guy who is essentially a rookie. If a rookie was doing what Jordan Love was doing in terms of running the offense, distributing the ball to the playmakers, and really doing everything you want of a quarterback, everyone would be singing his praises. But because he's sat behind Aaron Rodgers for 3 years, we're almost expecting Jordan Love's supposed to be a superstar. So yeah, I love him in Dynasty. I think he's a great buy as that sort of high upside QB2 if you can get him right now. Is he a guy that you think could have sneaky upside this week?
I mean, for me, Jordan Love, what's his price on DraftKings this week? So he's down at 5.6. So really, you're kind of hoping for that 18, 19-point game from a quarterback in that range, because you need enough leverage to really make it work for your lineup. If you're playing a quarterback in that range, they absolutely have to be helping you open up enough elsewhere in your lineup that you can combat Lamar Jackson going for 35 or Josh Allen going for 35. So I really struggle to play guys like Jordan Love in general. And when you look at what Jordan Love's done so far, he had 245 passing yards in week 1 and then 151 passing yards week 2. What's kept him alive a lot for fantasy has been he scored 3 touchdowns in each of them. So he's had 23 PPR points and then 20.3 PPR points last week. It's like he's a fringe startable player in DFS at that rate. But it kind of comes back to what do you think of the New Orleans defense? And, they've been very good against wide receivers. They've given up very few points to them. They've been less good against players from the slots. And they've allowed only 5.2 yards per pass attempt, which is the 4th best. So I think there's an element that Jordan Love hasn't really played anyone too difficult yet. And the Saints might be a more tricky defense in some ways and could possibly put him in a bit of a spin. So even in Green Bay, it's slightly more interesting because that's an area where he's going to be more familiar with and going into the Saints stadium. But for me, I think there's just more upside to be had elsewhere this week.
Okay, makes sense. We got a question in the chat from Baby Santa. He's asking, should he trade away Justin Fields, James Conner, Chris Godwin for Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, 0.5 PPR. It's a 1 QB league. Tom, what are you doing with that trade?
I quite like that because, I mean, we've talked about Justin Fields and how the issues are aplenty. James Conner feels like somebody who is producing through volume at the minute alone. And and Godwin, he's not seeing those kind of design screenplays as much as he used to in previous offenses. So I definitely don't hate it. I would see if you can get it a little bit cheaper because even though Justin Fields is stinking it up right now, his ceiling is so much higher than Goff's. It feels like you're possibly paying a little too much.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I love this trade because I think that you're looking at his running back depth. He's got Saquon, he's got Pollard, he's got Kyron Williams, he's got James Cook. I don't think James Conner's getting in his lineup most weeks. So for me, I'm viewing this as a bench running back, a slight downgrade at quarterback, but it's 1 QB league, so I'm not that worried, for a massive upgrade at wide receiver. And yeah, he's got Mike Evans, he's got Mike Williams, he's got Christian Kirk. I think he needs that upgrade at receiver. So I quite like the move. I agree with you. If you can get it a bit cheaper, go for it. Maybe remove the quarterbacks out. Can you get James Conner and Godwin for Amon-Ra St. Brown straight up? I'd prefer that. But yeah, I really like the move. And then final question whilst we're here, Tom. Trade Etienne, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Dotson for Ridley, Kenneth Walker and Lockett. What do you think?
I'm not sure I would. I think I'm not overly high on Travis Etienne, but I think what we've seen is that he's not going to fade away anytime soon. I think if you're gaining Kenneth Walker, I'd be more worried about his job security over the next 10 weeks than Travis Etienne's. And yeah, Amon-Ra St. Brown in full PPR is just a cheat code, so I'm always interested in that. I do like Tyler Lockett, but I'd much rather not have a wide receiver and running back from the same offense that I'm having. They're not going to hit always on the same weeks.
Yeah, I don't like this trade at all. I think Etienne's better than Kenneth Walker. I think Amon-Ra St. Brown's better than Ridley. And I think, you could probably argue that Lockett's better than Dotson, but I don't think that's necessarily a slam dunk. So for me, I'd much rather the Etienne Amon-Ra St. Brown side. So we'll move on to the next matchup. But if you are here, if you are watching, get your comments in the questions. We will answer every single question we get live. If you're not watching live, you can still post comments below. You can still ask your questions. We respond to 100% of questions we get. So if you've got start-sit questions, trade questions, anything, get them below and we will get to them. Tom, New England, New York Jets. We can just skip over this. We don't have to talk about the Jets if you don't want to, or do you think there's someone that you fancy starting this week?
Well, I mean, we can't completely skip over them. I think we kind of have to talk about the fact that Breece Hall is begging for the squeaky wheel narrative. You went out and there was deleted tweets, it was all that kind of thing. We've seen it before with players like J.K. Dobbins. The running backs, they want the touches. They're ready to be unleashed. And Breece Hall looks pretty much like he's ready to be getting more touches than this. I mean, complete three-way timeshare last week with Michael Carter, Breece Hall, and Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook fumbles the ball. This is no surprise. This is what Dalvin Cook does. He's just not got it anymore. Yes, he's a fine backup to Breece Hall, but it's time to start giving Breece Hall a little more work so that you don't have to rely on Zach Wilson, who, his completion record when pressured is 30%. That's just not going to cut it. And he's being pressured at a league high 53% of dropbacks this year. If you want the defenses to start not try to pressure you quite so much, then let Breece Hall get out there. Let him run some routes. Let him actually go for some runs so that they have to take account for more than just Zach Wilson dropping back, trying to hit Garrett Wilson. And I think if you've got Garrett Wilson, you can... I mean, it's really tricky. I don't know where he is in your weekly rankings, Rich, but like last week, after he scored his 68-yard touchdown, here's the rest of the targets that he got. Incomplete, complete for 15 yards, interception, return for 32 yards, incomplete, interception, and then incomplete. So that's what it's going to be like with Garrett Wilson. You might see him running and looking fantastic in his route running, but it's going to be really tricky. But I would attack this from the running backs with Breece Hall. I don't think many people are going to play him. At 5,600 on DraftKings, I think that's completely fine. And the Patriots are allowing running backs 5.2 yards per carry, which is fourth highest rate across the league. But then on the Patriots side, yeah, there's possibly a little bit more to talk about there. Ramondre Stevenson is a clear plug and play. I think, yes, the Jets are a decent run defense, but what we've seen is that Zeke was phased out slightly last week. He went from 12 touches in week 1 to only 5 last week, and he didn't get any targets. All the running back targets went to Ramondre. The Jets are allowing the fourth highest catch percentage to opposing wide receivers at 75%. So you can start Kendrick Bourne. We've seen 20 targets for your guy in 2 games. Devontae Parker, he had 100% of the snaps last week. And then we've talked about this for a couple of weeks. The Jets just struggle to defend tight ends, and Hunter Henry's had back-to-back games of over 16 points, which is kind of incredible for him. And even with Mike Gesicki, he saw his snap share jump from 40% in week 1 to 70% last week. It still didn't stop Hunter Henry from being the dominant tight end 1.
Yeah, I think going back to your question about Garrett Wilson, I've got him wide receiver 26, which feels probably a little bit high if I'm being honest, but I just think he's got that, as you saw last week, he's got that ability to take any reception to the house. So I think that's the point where I'm, got to rank him, but I'm all in on Breece Hall this week. We talked about it in our members only Discord earlier in the week. I think this is the last window you can go and buy Breece Hall in Dynasty. I think the Jets now realize that if they want to make the playoffs, I think they need to say to Breece Hall, this offense is now yours, and he needs to carry the Jets there. He had the little whinge after the game. He sent out the tweet. He moaned about, reporters were asking him why the running game wasn't working. He said, I only got 4 carries. I think I wouldn't be shocked if he saw 20 touches this week. I think that's well within his range of outcomes. And I think that the Jets, you can see on the screen there last week, complete backfield split. I think we're going to see Breece Hall at a kind of 60, if not 70% share and getting the vast majority of the touches. The next matchup we have got is Denver at Miami. Tom, serious question. If Denver lose, could this be the end of the Russell Wilson era in Denver? Could we see Jarrett Stidham?
I think it's possibly a little early for that. I know Sean Payton doesn't accept anything other than winning. And all the moves Sean Payton made this offseason weren't about slowly rebuilding the Broncos. It was very much about what can I do to get us in a position where we might be able to sneak in of a wild card. And if it all worked out, then perhaps that would have been fine. But the truth is that this offense, it needs time. It needs healthy players like Jerry Jeudy, who only just came back from his hamstring injury last week. It needs a healthy Javonte Williams who can carry a running game. And what we've seen at the minute is Javonte Williams looks okay, but he doesn't look fantastic. Samaje Perine doesn't look as good as he did with the Bengals last year, to the point where even Jaleel McLaughlin's getting like, 1 carry a week, but last year snuck in for a touchdown. And you can see on screen, Javonte's 34th out of 48 running backs in EPA. So it's really not quite materialized on that front. In terms of players who I would play this week, it was very frustrating for me after thinking that Marvin Mims' breakout would come in week 1 to then see last week he absolutely tore it up and, had 8.1 yards per route run, which is just astounding. So maybe Sean Payton just, accepts that this is the version of Russ he's got to live with. And if he wants to win, then he's got to let Russ take some of those deep downfield shots and get on with it. So, yeah, I don't think this Broncos team are going to be able to keep up with the Dolphins, who pass at a high rate. They pass at a 60% rate compared to 40% run. Tua leads the league in yards with 715 and 9.5 yards per attempt. And the Broncos, for all they've got Patrick Surtain, who we've talked about being incredible, They're allowing the second highest wide receiver catch rate at 81%. So you can get them that way. The Broncos allow the third most running back receiving yards at 114. So is this a week where Raheem Mostert has another good week? We saw last week, he looked fantastic ripping off that 40-yard run, finishes the RB5, and he's only 6K. I think most people will want to play Tyreek and Tua. But if you add Raheem Mostert in there as well, that's a good way to get different if you're playing on DraftKings. Jalen Waddle, it feels like at some point we'll see the kind of explosion game for him. But it's also kind of noteworthy that Tyreek Hill had 5 red zone targets and Jalen Waddle's had 0 so far. So I think perhaps the ADP just pushed Jalen Waddle a little too high this offseason simply because he doesn't have quite enough to just take on Tyreek and how dominant Tyreek is.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing there is that you brushed over is Raheem Mostert. I think he's been phenomenal, and I'm really interested in him as a super cheap dynasty buy. You know, if you're struggling with injuries, you've got Jonathan Taylor, Austin Eckler, Saquon Barkley, you've lost Nick Chubb or J.K. Dobbins. Like, there's plenty of running back injuries away, and Raheem Mostert's just sat over there, probably worth less than a second. Can you send a second round pick for Raheem Mostert and a third or something like that? Like, he is screaming out as a buy in Dynasty right now, and he's got no competition. Devon Achane's, not quite seeing the field, not seeing the workload that we hoped he would. Salvon Ahmed certainly not getting it done. Jeff Wilson doesn't sound like he's 100% coming back from week 5 on. I think Raheem Mostert, if you want someone cheap, if you want someone you can just plug in and get moving, I'm really excited about that. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, Tom. First of all, T. Higgins or Keenan Allen rest of season? This is Keenan Allen for me by a landslide.
Keenan Allen easy for me. I think even if Joe Burrow is healthy, I think Jamar Chase will get back to himself at some point. We saw last season how much Jamar Chase just became a target hog at points. I think last week was a case of really trying to get T. Higgins going, and it worked for them. And then you just concentrate on what worked because it wasn't working with Jamar Chase. But yeah, definitely Keenan Allen all the way.
And then next question from Caden. I'm thinking of buying low on Josh Jacobs. Would a trade for Jalen Reed be good? If not, maybe thinking of pairing up Khalil Herbert and Marvin Mims, like the potential. I talked about Josh Jacobs as a buy low in my members only trade article that we released on Tuesday now. I love Josh Jacobs as a buy low. I think he's been rusty. I think that he's got a great schedule coming up. I think we're going to see the Raiders lean on him more. Would I make both of those trades? Absolutely. If you're a contender and you need that running back, I think those both good moves for him. Do you agree, Tom, or are you nervous about Josh Jacobs right now?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs has looked bad, but this is a guy who didn't practice through the summer. And for all these running back holdouts over the summer, none of them are working out particularly well. Also, I think it was Ted Nugent of The Athletic put it out this week that the Raiders are getting more close to the line of scrimmage defensive looks because defenses just don't respect Jimmy's ability to throw it deep, so they're happy to be closer to the line of scrimmage. So I do think that it might take a little while for Josh Jacobs to get going. But absolutely, I think he's very much a value, and I would definitely do Jalen Reed for Josh Jacobs because at some point Christian Watson is going to be back, and at some point Romeo Doubs is going to get up to full health, and I think that that's a point where Josh Jacobs could be a better player for the rest of the season.
Absolutely. So the next matchup, 2 young divisions, 2 young quarterbacks down in the AFC South, Houston against Jacksonville. It feels like this could have sneaky shootout potential. I think both these offenses are pass first, relatively fast offenses, really good passing games. Could this be the sneaky block game that could win people DFS?
I think there's definitely an element of that, and I think it's going to be interesting. I mean, you look at what's going on with CJ Stroud. The offensive line is miserable, but Laramie Tunsil practiced today for the second day running. That's a massive win. If Laramie Tunsil's there, that's at least half the offensive line that he doesn't need to worry about. He only needs to be looking to his right rather than his left. And what we've seen from CJ Stroud, he's got the 4th most yards so far this offseason, and he's throwing it. He's dealing. He's only been QB 17 because the touchdowns haven't really been there. But he's got a great relationship with Nico Collins, who was the 4th most air yards in the league at 274th. And Robert Woods has seen constant volume as well. So I think if you're looking to attack this game in a DFS way, you can stack CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Robert Woods with Calvin Ridley on the other side of things, or you can take the Jacksonville side, because what we saw last week was that Christian Kirk is probably going to be a better play in games where we project it to be close. Against the Chiefs, the Jags had to play 3 wide receiver sets more often. So Christian Kirk was out there more often. The Chiefs took away Calvin Ridley, and Christian Kirk was the guy that they went to. Zay Jones put up a 0. So, yeah, I think that there's plenty of shootout potential. I'm not overly interested in the running backs on either side of this one. I do think Travis Etienne is probably going to be more productive, but at 6,900 on DraftKings, that just feels a tad high for me. I think you can probably find other running backs in a similar price range with a bit more value. And on the Texans side of things, we're just in wait and see mode on Dameon Pierce. You know, he's 35th in yards before contact because the offensive line's been so bad. Dead last in rushing EPA, 67th in yards per carry at 2.3. And it's not like he's getting involved in the passing game to a point which really helps him get by that. So, yeah, I'd also just a quick mention of Evan Ingram, who's the tight end 3 and is 3rd in tight end targets with 13. So he's somebody that we thought might step back a little bit with Calvin Ridley being part of that offense, but he's just kept it going. So lots of ways to attack it, and I wouldn't really worry about anybody in that game.
Yeah, I think for me, I love both these passing offenses. You know, I love Trevor Lawrence and Calvin Ridley, and what CJ Stroud, Nico Collins, Tank Dell have done so far this season is phenomenal. I think Nico Collins is a future superstar, and if you can go and buy him in Dynasty, I've been imploring all of our members to go and do it because I think he's phenomenal. And I think when this offensive line does get healthy, you know, you see on the screen Pat Fitzmaurice talking about Dameon Pierce carrying the ball. I think it's going to help him. I think it's going to help CJ Stroud. I think it's going to help this entire offense. So, yeah, very excited about that. We've got a few more conversations in the chat. This is from Sprawls. So he was the one saying about T. Higgins or Keenan Allen. He can trade T. Higgins and Geno Smith for Keenan Allen. For me, that's a smash. I think if it's presuming it's a 1 QB league, Geno Smith is basically a guy that should probably be fringe waiver wire each week, probably, you know, the guy that might stream him. So yeah, I value Geno Smith as nothing. So I'm seeing that as Keenan Allen better than T. Higgins. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely very easy, that one for me.
Perfect. And then next question from Zabi, 2-0, half PPR, trade away Brian Robinson, Antonio Gibson, and DJ Moore for Jamar Chase and Breece Hall.
I mean, that's a real no risk it, no biscuit kind of play. I think if you'd said that we'd be having that conversation 3 weeks ago, it would have been a lot of laughter. But yeah, I think I would do that simply because do I really believe that Antonio Gibson's going to help me too much this season? I don't. DJ Moore, I know he had a good week last week, but I'm not expecting every week to be like that for him. And I think Brian Robinson's production is sustainable. But if you're telling me I could get possibly Jamar Chase and Breece Hall, yeah, I'd do that. No risk it, no biscuit.
I think this is a smash for me. I think that's a league-winning move. Like, let's be honest, Jamar Chase was a top 3 pick in pretty much every league this year. Breece Hall was, you know, when he was healthy last year, was a top 5 running back. Brian Robinson's been phenomenal, and I think his production has been amazing. But that's easily a smash for me. And then final question from Richard Bilkey, one of our YouTube members. He says, I have Chubb Barkley team in a lot of pain. Would you start Breeder Thursday night or wait to see if Gainwell plays Monday? I also have Tyjae Spears in case Gainwell is ruled out.
I'd be starting Breeder tonight. I don't think it's a particularly good matchup, but I think when you're talking about losing Chubb and Barkley, there's not a huge amount of great stuff on the waiver wire. I would also be completely ready to start Tyjae Spears if Gainwell is ruled out. But yeah, I feel like we're definitely going to get more news on the Gainwell situation. We should see an Eagles practice report today or tomorrow, definitely. So it should be all right. And, if you want to become a YouTube member like Rich, it's 99p, like $1.25 a month upwards. Loads of DFS content, Rich's Dynasty content, loads of exclusive stuff in there, which is going to help you crush your leagues.
And if you're here, if you're watching, we've got plenty of you in the chat, plenty of you watching live. We got 3 likes. What are you doing? If you're watching live and you've not hit that thumbs up button, do it right now. Do us a solid. Help us out. Let's spread the word and get more people coming and watching the content. The next game, Tennessee at Cleveland. Feels like this is a slightly less interesting matchup after the Nick Chubb injury. 99% of the money at the moment, Tom, is on the under. It feels like this over-under is going to fall even lower than 39.5 as it is currently. Is there anyone that you're watching in this matchup that you think you can start in a DFS lineup this week?
It's definitely not going to be a contest which people are flocking to. I haven't looked at ownership projections yet this week, but I can't imagine anyone's overly excited to start anyone. Deshaun Watson needs a good week, possibly more than just about any QB in the league outside of Justin Fields. Like, Ryan Tannehill had a terrible week 1, and then he comes out last week and looks fairly good against the Chargers. So all the QB pressure is on Deshaun Watson, who doesn't seem to be mentally processing the game. Like, it's, when he throws the ball and he is on time with things and stuff, it looks good. But what he's not doing is what Baker Mayfield did well with the Browns when he did do things well, was he got the ball out on time and to the receivers who it was supposed to go to. And Deshaun Watson just isn't doing that. He looks lost out there at times. I think, this is a game in Cleveland. Amari Cooper's home games splits have been slightly better, so you could possibly talk yourself into that. Jerome Ford at 4,800. Yes, everyone got burned by Josh Kelly last week against Titans' run defense, and I would imagine most people don't want to make that play this week. So in tournaments, I'd be fine playing Jerome Ford. On the Titans side of things, it's just pretty ugly, really. DeAndre Hopkins keeps missing practices and then popping up and being there for him. I think Chigozie Okonkwo is going to have a week soon where he pops up with a really nice performance. And at 3,200, I don't mind taking shots on that kind of pump play. Also, David Njoku, I think he is somebody that is doing okay. He's 28th in total targets. He's only had 5.6 points per game. And what the Browns need to do is they need to get him downfield. You can see on screen there, his ADAR, average depth of target, is 1.5 yards. That's miserable. Like, if they get David Njoku more involved in the game, it could be interesting. But generally for me, this is just going to be an easy fade. And if I'm wrong, I don't feel like I'm going to be terribly wrong on this matchup.
No, I don't disagree basically with anything you're saying there. The one guy I'm super excited about, Tyjae Spears, I think he is a guy that you need to go out and buy in Dynasty right now. I think Derrick Henry, I'm not convinced he's going to be on the team by the end of the year. I wouldn't be shocked if the Titans are out of contention once we get to that trade deadline. Could he be a guy that, the Ravens go and trade for to try and push him over the top or something like that? I think Derrick Henry could move. Yeah, absolutely. I think he could be moved. I think that Tyjae Spears, if Derrick Henry is kept till the end of the year, Tyjae Spears, this is his backfield next year. He's absolutely tearing it up. He's leading the league in yards per carry. He's, forcing breaking tackles left, right, and center. You can see on the screen there, Nick Whalen tweeted out, he's number 1 in rushing grade through 2 weeks on PFF. He's everything you would want from a running back. It's just he's stuck behind Derrick Henry, but that's not going to be there for long. I think he's a smash buy to go and grab right now. If you're here and you've not hit that subscribe button, hit the subscribe. There is so much content coming out at the moment. Tom's got his DFS stuff flowing. We'll get the YouTube members only show by the end of the week. You get my Dynasty stuff. Hit that subscribe, hit the like whilst you're here and get more league winning content. Carolina at Seattle. We've just seen before we came on air that Bryce Young is not going to play. Does that affect this matchup for you at all?
I think so, yeah. I mean, we saw last year Andy Dalton, he had a 67% completion record for the Saints, and he kind of looked better than we expected him to. But he still only averaged 12.6 points per game. And that was thrown to Chris Olave and Juwan Johnson, who was having a fantastic season. What we've seen, and you don't have to go far on Twitter to see clips of the Panthers wide receivers just not getting open. Bryce Young has nobody to throw to. So I don't think you can start any of the Panthers outside maybe a dart throw on Hayden Hurst. The Seahawks, they've allowed the fourth most receiving yards to tight ends. Last year, they really struggled against the position. So if you're stacking up like Geno and you're looking for a bring back, Hayden Hurst is the only one I'd really look to. Like Miles Sanders, he's probably going to get a lot of work, but Seattle, they've faced the league high 62 rush attempts and they're only allowing 2.7 yards per carry, which is second best in the league. So, yeah, the main interest, it just comes down to how much do the Seahawks put their foot on the pedal and really try to just crush an opponent and feel good about themselves. Like Kenneth Walker, again, like I angered big Kenneth Walker Twitter today by talking about the fact that he's not been terribly productive, had a lot of touches last week that went for less than 1 yard compared to only a couple of runs where they went for over 5 yards. And he got very lucky. He benefited from DK Metcalf being tackled at like the 1 inch line, and then Kenneth Walker took it in for a touchdown. But I think you can go back to the well on Kenneth Walker here. This doesn't feel like the time where Zach Charbonnet suddenly pops up for a lot of play. Geno Smith seemed to get a bit more right last week. His completion rate jumped from 61% in week 1 to 75% last week. Yards per attempt jumped from 4.3 to 8. And even though the Seahawks have problems on offensive line, Carolina has generated pressure on quarterbacks at a league low 16%. So I'm not expecting Geno to be under any pressure. I can't see how the Panthers really do anything here. So maybe they upset me and pull it out of the bag.
No, I tend to agree. I think this could be an absolute boat race. And I don't particularly want to have any part of any of that Carolina offense this week. The guy I want to talk about that you've not touched on there, Zach Charbonnet. We were both huge fans in the offseason. It feels like through 2 weeks, everybody's really high on Kenneth Walker. Yet, to me, it's the same issues that we had last year. It's boom-bust potential. He's not getting it done. And last week, he started to reduce the passing game usage. We see Dwayne McFarland's talking about he's already starting to, cede some of that passing game usage to Zach Charbonnet. I think Zach Charbonnet is a really sneaky buy now. If you're in a redraft league, you can probably go and grab him off the waiver wire. If you're Dynasty, I think his price is definitely going to be cheaper than it was a month, 2 months ago. And he's a guy that I'm really interested to go and get because I think he is going to have a role in this offense moving forward.
Yeah, and one point I made on Twitter earlier when people were mad at me, like Kenneth Walker has 1 fourth quarter touch in the last 2 games. Like they aren't relying on him at that point in the game. Against the Lions, he had 3 touches for more than 3 yards and 10 touches for 1 or fewer yards. Pete Carroll's old school. If you keep wasting opportunities, he's going to put the other guy in there at some point and see what he can do.
Absolutely. And we got one more question. Start Waller or Laporta this week. Where are you going there?
I think you kind of have to start Darren Waller simply because of the lack of options for Daniel Jones. You kind of have to put a bit of trust in the guy you drafted higher.
Yeah, Waller's a top 5 tight end for me this week. I think you got to plug him in. As good as Laporta's been, as much as I love Laporta, I think you've got to go there. Right. Are you ready to have a Justin Fields conversation, Tom? Because I feel like this Chicago and KC matchup, I feel like let's just talk about Justin Fields.
So, I mean, Justin Fields, he came out yesterday and he's saying all the wrong things. Yes, he briefly blamed the coaching staff and walked that back, and he's kind of saying, okay, that's not what he meant. But Justin Fields isn't letting loose with the ball. Yes, the touchdown pass to Chase Claypool last week was gorgeous. Really nice pass. But there's just too many negatives. I think, he's targeting running backs at a league high rate, but it doesn't really matter. It's not turning them into fantasy producers. His average depth of target is 4.5 yards, which is dead last among all quarterbacks. And what we want from Justin Fields is if he's not doing it through the passing game, then we need to see it on the ground. So far, he's gone 13 rush attempts for 62 yards, but only 4 for 3 last week. So they have to start putting some design plays in for him. You have to see that, because otherwise he isn't the weapon that he can be. Like, you aren't going to beat the Chiefs with Justin Fields dinking and dunking to running backs for 4.5 yards per carry. He has to get the ball downfield. And I think part of that is Darnell Mooney needs to be on the field more than Chase Claypool. Darnell Mooney is a better downfield threat, and he'll open things up a little bit more for DJ Moore to work in. Cole Kmet is averaging 8.6 PPR points, but he's yet to hit 50 yards. So, I mean, that's just kind of the story with Cole Kmet. He's a touchdown or bust kind of tight end, and he's not somebody I'd ever look to play. Chiefs, you can pretty much start whoever you want. But wide receivers, it's a dart throw every week. Yes, Sky Moore bounced back last week, had 16 points. Saw his snaps fall, though, from 70% down to 60%. Rashee Rice, his snaps dropped from 30% down to 17%. His touches dropped from 4 to 2. And we saw Kadarius Toney pretty much consistent around that 25 to 28% snaps. And yes, he gets targeted when he's on the field, but he's just a gadget player. So I don't mind taking shots on Kadarius Toney or Rashee Rice or MVS in tournaments. Travis Kelce, yeah, he only played 64% of the snaps last week, but Andy Reid's had a long history of not throwing players straight back in when we're off injuries. So I think this week we see him get back to his full potential. But I really worry about Justin Fields and that terrible Bears offensive line who lost, was it the left guard or the left tackle this week to IR against the Chiefs defensive line that I think will absolutely eat him up unless he actually gets out of the pocket quickly.
Yeah, I think Nate Davis is gone. I think Chris Jones is going to absolutely eat. I think people want to talk about Kansas City as this elite offense, but they're a top 5 defense right now, and I don't think enough people are talking about how good that is. I feel like I'm turning into a Justin Fields hater, but it's warranted. I went away this week and I thought, I'm getting too negative on Justin Fields. I'm going to clear out everything. I'm going to go back and watch the tape. I've plugged in the 2 games. The issue with Justin Fields when he was coming out as a rookie was that I felt that he didn't process. He didn't go from 1 to 2 to 3 ever. And the argument was that's Ohio State. He's got these elite receivers. He doesn't need to go 1 to 2. When he gets in the league, he's going to do it. He stares down the first read more than any NFL quarterback I have seen. It is appalling. He cannot process. Yes, the offensive line is awful. Yes, they've got issues at receiver. Yes, the offensive play caller is absolutely appalling, and they've got receivers running the same routes and wrong routes, and it's an absolute joke. But Justin Fields needs to be able to do the basics of going from his first read to his second read. He can't do that at the moment, and that's all on him. And I'm convinced that I don't know if Justin Fields is going to be a starting quarterback at the end of the year. So if you're rostering him in Dynasty, I think you need to get out now because that price is only going one way right now. We got one more question in the chat before we get on to Dallas and Arizona. Pick 2, Connor, Kelly, and Rachaad White. What are you going?
I'd definitely go Kelly. I have no problems with Kelly this week. I think against that Vikings team we talked about at the top of the show is a really easy matchup. Rachaad White, possibly over James Conner. I think this Dallas defense is gnarly and will definitely clamp down on the Cardinals, and you'd really just be hoping to get there through receptions. And I think Rachaad White last week showed a little bit better, and I've got enough faith in him that I'd probably go back to the well this week.
Yeah, I'm Rachaad White and Kelly there for me. So Dallas at Arizona feels like this was a Dallas blowout, although breaking news has just been released that the cornerback for Dallas, Trevon Diggs, has torn his ACL at practice. So that's him done for the year. Does that make you a little bit more interested in potentially some of these Arizona receivers, Tom?
It's tricky because the Cowboys, Trevon Diggs is such a good player and he can absolutely remove a player from a matchup. And that was something which it was like, okay, well, I didn't expect to be playing Marquise Brown because of it. I mean, Marquise Brown has been playing well. He's had 2.6 PPR points per touch, which is higher than Justin Jefferson, higher than CD Lamb. Like, that's a really high rate, and he's been efficient with it. But also, in this offense, with this complete, just lack of talent, Marquise Brown should have been seeing over a 30% target share, and he's only at 25%. So it's like we're not quite seeing as much as we'd like. So, yeah, maybe with Trayvon Diggs out, I think Marquise Brown becomes a fringe play for me on DraftKings. I think now, if you're looking to attack this game on DFS, then yeah, you can run it back with Marquise Brown. In terms of redraft, I would consider starting him if I had to, but we've seen this Cardinals offense for the last couple of weeks. They're frisky, slightly better than we expected, but they're still not particularly good. They're doing the good version of the tank where it's like, okay, they stay in games a little bit longer than expected. They're a bit more frisky, but they lose the game. And Josh Dobbs really isn't there. I think on the Cowboys side, you look at what kind of guaranteed production do you have that you can get there, even if they take their foot off the gas late. Dak is possibly not a player I'd be looking for a ceiling game. I think CD Lamb can definitely get there. Last week, 25 PPL points, 143 total yards. Didn't have a and I think, yeah, it's probably fine. Michael Gallup is probably one of my bigger whiffs this offseason. I thought he could come in and be the wide receiver 2 on that offense, but so far we're not seeing it. 4 targets in 2 games, even without Brandon Cooks. Jake Ferguson leads all pass catchers in red zone targets with 8, 3 more than any other player in the league. So I don't mind starting Jake Ferguson. He's only 3.6K. It's a little bit cheaper than Kyle Pitts. And we've seen the team possibly like him a bit more than the Falcons like Kyle Pitts. So that's fine. I think Tony Pollard is just going to be an auto smash every single week. Over the last month of best ball, there was one player I was consistently reaching on in drafts, and it was Tony Pollard because I wanted to make sure I hit about 15% exposure on him. And you look at what he's got. He ranks 3rd amongst running backs in rush attempts at 39, joint 2nd in targets with 10, and he's the running back 4 in PPR and half PPR formats. He's getting all the goal line work. It's like his usage is elite.
Yeah, Tony Pollard for me, he's now a top 4 dynasty type running back as well. Adam Levitan puts it on the screen exactly there. Leads the NFL and carries inside the 10-yard line. 17.5 target share. Absurd talent, role, environment. He's everything you want from a fantasy running back right now. So he's a smash play in all setups. And yeah, I think that he's showing that he's a player that Dallas is going to invest in. And I think they're going to re-sign him at the end of the year. So from a dynasty perspective, I'm, wheels up. I'm all in on Pollard. That's enough of the kind of the main slate games. We're going to move on to some of the Sunday night, the Monday night games. Pittsburgh at Las Vegas. It feels like both these offenses are just kind of spluttering and not really got going. We've got a 43 over under, but 99% of the cash again is on the under. I imagine that number's coming down. Anyone that you particularly like to get in your redraft lineups, Tom?
George Pickens, I mean, he's seeing a better route tree than we've seen at any point in his career. With Deontay Johnson not there, they're having to use him a bit better. So I don't mind Deontay Johnson. The Steelers are targeting tight ends at the 2nd lowest rate in the league at just 12%. Pat Freiermuth, I think if you can find a better option, I probably would. But this Raiders defense, we talked about it in the Bills segment, like this Raiders defense can't stop anyone. They're just going to be bad all season. So if you need to start Pat Freiermuth, you can. Najee Harris, look, we're trying to warn you. We said, so many of us said all offseason that Najee Harris, A, isn't good, B, Jaylen Warren is good, and C, that the Steelers aren't going to operate in a complete workhorse role like they have done in the past. So, if you don't have a backup plan for Najee Harris, it's time to go and get one now because the gap's closing between them. This week, we saw Mike Tomlin talk about how well Jaylen Warren played and how they need to get him more touches. And it's a natural progression to give him more touches as he progresses as a player. So definitely them. I mean, Josh Jacobs, you've kind of got to start. And I do think sooner or later that he is going to have a decent game. Devontae Adams, I believe, was back at practice yesterday and today. Jacoby Myers as well. So you can play them. I thought Hunter Renfrow might fill in for Jacoby Myers last week and be a good play, and that just turned out miserably. So apologies to anyone who followed that one. Then, Michael Mayer just doesn't seem to be a thing right now for the Raiders. So I don't think you were probably going to start him in redraft anyway. But if you were, there's probably better options out there.
Yeah, I'm confused as to why a rookie tight end that you've brought in and given a significant role in week 1 in terms of snaps, you're going to suddenly start shrinking his role when you've got receivers missing. I can't get my head around that usage. Josh Jacobs, we talked about a little bit earlier. I think he's a really nice buy in terms of dynasty, redraft, whatever. Probably not quite there yet, but I think he's got a nice little run of matchups coming. I think he could be a sneaky little one down the stretch. You look at his usage and, he's going to get there, I think. The next matchup, Philly at Tampa Bay. Look, Baker's cooking at the moment. This Tampa Bay offense is looking good. Do you think this could be an interesting one for kind of fancy options this week?
Yeah, I do. I mean, the big question is going to be whether the Tampa Bay offensive line can hold up against that Eagles defensive front. Like Jalen Carter looks like an absolute menace. We've seen how good they can be in matchups, and the Bucs offensive line definitely isn't a strength at the minute. So that will be very interesting. But Baker, he's doing fantastic. Mike Evans looks fantastic. So lean into them. I think the Eagles quite often give up running back receptions. They take away the game in other aspects, and so they're happy to let a little bit go underneath, and their linebackers aren't a strength of the team. So Rashad White could possibly see more use. Perhaps it's a game where Chris Godwin gets going, but so far it's been a little bumpy for Chris Godwin. I'd be fine with the main options on the Bucs. I think Cade Otton is a nice dart throw if you play in showdown slates, because we've seen this Eagles team struggle to defend tight ends over the last couple of weeks. On the Philly side of things, we're all waiting to hear if Kenneth Gainwell's going to play. That would very much change the outlook, I think, for DeAndre Swift. Kenneth Gainwell has got so much credit in the bank with this Eagles offense. He's been around with them, taking them, played ahead of other running backs at points of the Super Bowl. But I also think that Devonta Smith could easily have a big week. Tampa have allowed third most fantasy points to wide receivers out wide. We saw the squeaky wheel narrative kind of possibly for A.J. Brown. He was shouting at Jalen Hurts on the sideline. So I quite like the idea of aggressively attacking this game for showdowns and really try to make sure you fit both Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown into the lineups.
Yeah, quite like that. We've got another question in the chat. Just got offered T. Higgins and Ken Walker for CD Lamb.
I think I'd stick with CD Lamb, unless you really need a running back.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on kind of what the rest of your roster is, but that's not enough for me to be selling CD Lamb there. We got one more matchup to go, guys. If you've made it this far, hit the like button, hit that thumbs up. Come on, let's get some more numbers up there. And also, if you've not already, hit the subscribe. We're closing in on 1350. Let's hit it tonight, and we can have a little party. And also, if you're liking what you see, hit the join button. Become a member from as little as 99p, $1.25 a month. You get access to DFS, best ball, dynasty, redraft content, everything you could ever want from as little as less than half the price of a cup of coffee right now. The final matchup, the Rams against Cincy. Man, these are two teams that are completely different to what we expected a month ago. It feels like Cincy can't push the ball downfield. Joe Burrow's calf is a serious issue. Can you trust anyone in the Bengals offense? Which is not a phrase I thought I'd be saying right now.
I think you kind of have to, don't you? Because this Rams defense isn't particularly good. Joe Burrow doesn't look great, but he's got that extra day, that extra day to Monday. He was out there at practice today, obviously in a limited fashion, and says it's feeling slightly better. I would worry about this injury all season. I think it's going to be a problem. And what was kind of concerning is that even when they were trying to get Jamar Chase involved near the line of scrimmage, it just wasn't working. It wasn't turning into anything good. So, yeah, I think you kind of have to trust Jamar Chase and really lean into it, much like you had to trust T. Higgins was going to get right last week. Irv Smith is a complete waste of fantasy spots. I mean, we talked about it all off season. 9 targets for 27 yards. Great work. Joe Mixon, RB21. This is a big part of the Bengals' problem. They don't have a running game that they can rely on to help them get out of it. Their defense, they've lost key pieces on it because they had to give up defensive options to be able to afford to pay Joe Burrow. And so the defense has taken a step back. So now the defense isn't being able to keep teams off the field. Your running game can't slow things down. So you're just going through quick drives, and it's not working for you. So I would worry about them. I think because it's in Cincinnati, I still would give the edge to the Bengals. But yeah, it's much easier making you start decisions on the Rams side and saying, okay, well, I'm going to start Puka, I'm going to start Kyron Williams, possibly start Tyler Higbee as well, and start Matthew Stafford. Because if they get into a shootout, and there are 2 bad defenses in this game, then I feel like Stafford is probably going to be a good bet to have another nice night.
Let's not forget Tutu Atwell in those slightly deeper leagues as well. I think his usage, the way they're using him with the motion has been phenomenal, and he's producing some sneaky upside, and I think Puka's overshadowing it, but I think Tutu Atwell is absolutely being a breakout. We've got one more question below. Cam Akers and Dotson for Breece Hall, 14 team. That's Breece Hall every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Yeah, beautiful. Well, that brings us to an end of the slate, end of the show. If you have got more questions, whether it be, dynasty, lineup, start sits, trade questions, whatever you want, get them in the comments below. We will answer 100% of the questions you have for us. Best of luck. If you're not a YouTube member and you're playing DFS, you're missing out on Tom's YouTube members only show that will be coming out on Friday or Saturday. It is phenomenal. It is winning all our members a lot of money. It has won me a lot of money through 2 weeks. Make sure you hit that join button and you can get it. And we'll be back next week, hopefully with some big W's and some money in the bank.